Hello and welcome back to Ross Taylor Woodworks. This time we've got a woodworking project. I started this back in July, about 3 months ago. We've got a project to make some frames for a church. They're doing an artwork project. There's an artist that's making some artwork for the frames here. And that was finally approved in September. And I'm getting ready to start making the frames. They're going to be made in oak. This is one of the prototypes. And I made this out of pine, and I made two prototypes. They took one prototype for test fitting. And that was approved. So we're going to go ahead and make the frames out of oak. And the artist made a mock-up of the artwork. It's actually a laminated acrylic with artwork pasted on the back side. It's very interesting. I've never seen anything like this before. So that's basically what it's going to look like. I made the frames to match the template, and then he brought a sample of the artwork, one of the pieces, and fit in there perfectly. So we're going to go ahead and make the frames based on that template. Okay, this was a plan with all the dimensions on it. The frame is 1.5 inches, and the artwork is 9 inches, so the total is 12 inches. And 48 3/4 tall. Now there were some other details that he was thinking of doing, and decided that didn't need this extra detail. I couldn't quite figure out this detail. I thought it would look out of place, and some extra beading or something. But we're just going to do a simple cove on the outside. And the artwork sits in a rabbet, a 9/16 by 3/8 rabbet. Okay, now these are the assembly jigs that I made back in July. These are 1/4 inch plywood templates for the stiles and the arch pieces. And then I use this jig to assemble the frames. So when we get to assembly, we'll see that. And a clamp here to clamp the frame. And it's just 1x blocks along my layout lines. Okay, here you can see my original layout lines. I did a full-scale layout before. Now the next step is to make all the oak pieces and use these as templates to mark all of the pieces. So there's 10 of these frames in total. So I got to make 20 stiles, 20 arch pieces. Okay, now I've got all my oak laid out. I'm going to mark and start milling the oak. Alright, here's my frame pieces all milled up. Got my bottom rails and the 20 stiles. I've sanded the edges on the belt sander and ran one face through the drum sander to clean up any machine marks. Okay, the next step is to make this rabbet on the back side, and I'm going to set up the dado head in the table saw to make this rabbet. This is one of the pieces from the mock-ups that I made. Okay, now that I have the rabbet made, I'm going to pair them up as left and rights. and mark left and right. Make sure I've got the rabbit facing inwards on both left and right pieces. Now I want to start cutting them to length. I'm going to line up the bottoms and just mark B on the bottom. Now I'm going to square up the bottom end. Now I'm going to use the templates and mark them to length. Keeping track of which edge faces in. Now I'm going to cut the angle at a 22.5 degrees. Now I'm going to cut the bottom rails to length. I've set up a stop block and I've determined the length for the bottom rails. Now I'm going to cut a tongue on the rails. Once again, use the dado head and I've made a slight adjustment. And cutting the faces of the rails to leave a little tongue on the back side. That's 9/16 inches long. Now I'm going to make the arched pieces for the top of the frames. Got a left and a right. And just trace them out. And to the bandsaw, and we'll cut those out. And follow up with the belt sander to clean up. Now I'm going to use the assembly jig to start putting the frames together. And I have to fit the arched pieces in. And I'm going to do some trimming on the belt sander to make all the pieces fit. And also to make sure it matches the original layout lines. Now I'm ready to start assembly. I'm going to start gluing up the bottom rail. And then clamp that. Now I'm going to glue up the arch. And just going to butt joint all the pieces together first. And clamp the frame flat, and use some wedges to clamp the arch together. Okay, now I've taken it out of the jig. Frame is glued together, but the top joints need more reinforcement. So I'm going to add a biscuit. I'm making a plunge cut across the joint and gluing in a biscuit to act as a spline. Okay, I trimmed and sanded the biscuits flush. Now I want to sand the fronts. So I'm going to run them through the drum sander. And I'm going to do a couple light passes just to clean up the fronts and get everything nice and flush. The next thing is just to clean up the edges, and one more pass on the belt sander. Okay, now I'm going back to the jigs that I built earlier. This was the assembly jig on this end of the table. Now on the other end of the table, I have another jig, this one to finish the rabbet on the back side of the frame. I'm going to use a router to route the rabbet in the arched pieces in the top. It's just a very simple jig with a straight edge offset the correct distance. Okay, in the router I have a 3/4 inch straight cutting bit. And the first pass I'm going to do what's called a climb cut. And that's go with the rotation of the router along the edge, just to break the edge and prevent any chip out. Now I'm going to do the full cut against the rotation, running the router along the straight edge. Okay, that's going to be it for this video. That shows the basic construction of the frames. I just have a little more detail to do on the edge, final sanding and finishing. And then the artwork is not coming in until maybe December. So we won't be installing that artwork until December. And then this project won't be completed until spring. They won't be installing the artwork in the church until spring, I believe in May. So I'll pick up at a later date showing what the artwork looks like in the frames. And then later on, another video possibly showing what it looks like in the church.